Hello and welcome to our presentation. This is Group 2 and our focus today is on population ecology. Our presentation will be divided into 4 parts. Part 1, we will discuss what is population ecology, the history and perspectives that help create this view, as well as the fundamentals and principles of the theory. Part 2, we will analyze case studies to show population ecology in action. We will briefly discuss Globe and Mail newspaper and IBM, but for our main case study, we will examine Tesla. In Part 3 of our presentation, we will discuss the criticisms about population ecology and a recent game changer, sustainability. Also in this section, we will compare population ecology to adaptation theory and show how this presentation is relevant to organizations now. Finally, in our 4th part, we will summarize the content and conclude our presentation with a quiz to see if we taught you well. Be sure to click on the link to check it out.
Part 1.
Before we begin with a brief history lesson, let's first define population ecology. So what is population ecology? It is the ability of an organization to adapt within its population of organizations, all of which work with and against each other. When one organization fades away, another one will take its place. The changing environment determines who comes and goes, survival of the fittest. So who started this perspective? Many different people have added and built upon the perspective, but Thomas Malthus is considered the originator. In the late 1700s, Thomas produced an essay on the principle of population. Within the essay, he states that the human population will grow faster than the space and food supplied needed to sustain the growth. In a quote, "The constant effort towards population, which is found even in the most vicious societies, increases the number of people before the means of subsistence are increased." Other influential theorists are Adam Smith and Charles Darwin. Adam Smith wrote the book Wealth of Nations, where he mentions invisible forces of supply and demand and how these impact market and pricing. Charles Darwin expounded on both of these theories, stating, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." So what are the fundamentals of population ecology? There are 2 main variables, population and geography. It is important to understand how the growth and decline of a population and the geographical arrangement of the population create the foundation of population ecology. Populations evolve over time. For example, new organizations enter the market and some exit. The rate at which this happens will dictate whether the population grows or declines. The geographical makeup of the population also matters. For instance, are these new organizations entering the market in different locations, increasing chances of survival, minimum competition, or are groups of organizations exiting the market in the same location? A population within the same location will have a lot more interaction compared to those within the same population, but are dispersed throughout different areas of the world. As a result, an increased interaction, those in the same location within the same population will start to compete with the resources in the area, creating competition among the population. Those organizations within the same population, but in different locations, may have a higher chance of survival. Population ecology also requires continuous change in the environment, and the environment is the driving force for change in organizations. If you paused the previous slide, you might have noticed that Tesla was not on the list of automotive companies in the example picture. This image was produced in 2010. If it was produced today, it would look very different, and not having Tesla in the image would seem very odd. As stated before, the environment is the driving force for changing the population ecology model. As an extreme example, imagine a large asteroid hitting Earth, destroying large areas. An organization could keep doing business as it always has, but most likely to its own detriment, as populations and geography will have changed. What are the principles of population ecology? There are 4 main principles. 1. Principles of cooperation. Populations cooperate amongst each other for increased benefits, access to resources, and chances of survival. As an example, competing companies Ford and GM have worked together to create a transmission which reduced the use of resources for both companies while allowing the creation of a new product. 2. principle of limiting factors, factors which control the growth and decline of a population. An example would be a logging company who has to stop working due to the lack of trees in the environment. 3. Principles of interacting organizations. Larger populations equals an increase in interaction. A common example would be Silicon Valley, where many companies work together and compete together. 4. Principles of competition. Shenzhen, China. While maybe not as well known as Silicon Valley in the United States, is the hub of many different competing factories who build many of the world's electronics. Each of these companies interact closely and therefore have increased competition. What you end up with is a life cycle. You have organizations that do not compete for resources because there is enough to go around. Supply exceeds demand. In turn, entrants enter the market because limiting factors don't exist yet. Population growth is controlled by various dependent and independent factors of population size. For instance, during population growth, there comes a time when the population size becomes too large and the resources available become scarce, forcing the population size to plateau. Independent limiting factors are those factors that do not depend on how dense the population is. Natural disasters is the most common type of independent limiting factor. When a natural disaster occurs, it can reduce the population. This is important because resources available can only supply a limited amount of organizations. When there is an equilibrium, the population has reached its carrying capacity, meaning the resources available have maxed out the number of organizations it can sustain. When the population exceeds its carrying capacity, there are internal and external factors that come into play to then bring the population back to equilibrium or less. If these factors which control the population, where the population ecology theory comes into play. Within population ecology, there are subtheories. You have inertia and change. Implies that organizations that are both reliable and accountable are those that can survive and are favored by natural selection. You have niche theory, distinguishes two types of organizations, generalists and specialists. Specialists maximize their exploitation of the environment and take the risks of the changing times. Generalists are conservative and opt for security. You have resource partitioning, describes a model about the founding and mortality rates as a function of market concentration. And then you have density dependence. Rates of growth and decline are dependent on the number of organizations in the market, supply and demand.
Part 2.
In this section, we will look for evidence of population ecology in the business world. Wait, that picture is population ecology in biology. Let's fix that. Now we can begin. To explore the evidence of population ecology in this section, 3 companies will be looked at and aligned with the principles of population ecology in the textbook. Key terms to understand and compare the theory include population, organizational form, niche, variation, selection, retention, struggle for existence or competition, generalist, and specialist. Let's begin our analysis. The first company we will look at is Globe and Mail newspaper. Let's start with a little background on why Globe and Mail makes for an interesting case study. Globe and Mail is one of the largest and oldest Canadian newspapers that was accused of plagiarism by an online blogger. They decided to downplay the accusation because they thought they were too big and too powerful to have to worry about online commentary until one blogger became many. This created unwanted attention, so Globe and Mail responded to the allegation with a one-liner saying that the accusation was baseless. More time went by and the online community of dislike for Globe and Mail grew. The company tried to ignore the situation. However, their underestimating of the influence of the bloggers and online platform ended up hurting them in the end. Thus, they were forced to fire the editor for plagiarism and cater heavily to the online community to regain their customer base. Why did I choose Globe and Mail as evidence of population ecology? In brief, it is a company that was affected by its ecology. The environment forces them to comply or burn. Now, let's look at population ecology and how we can apply the principles of the theory with the key terms we have discussed in our presentation. Key term 1, population. At this time, over 25 newspapers were competing, including the Toronto Star, currently number 1, the Gazette, and others. Based off the number of competitors, I would say the news environment in Canada was very competitive, and a mistake like this could have ended a smaller company. Key term 2, organizational form. The goal of Globe and Mail was to sell news by employing editors and publishers to populate stories for their newspaper and website. The case study showed the impact to Globe and Mail's organizational form when the blogger's plagiarism accusation ignited a hostile movement against the newspaper company, which eventually forced the paper to make a change in their culture to stay in business. Key term 3, niche. Globe and Mail was not trying to take advantage of the online niche initially, but later moved slowly towards that area, while other smaller companies took the lead. This led to them losing some of the market. Key term 4, the ecology model. This model is all about adapt and conquer, and I think Globe and Mail saw themselves in the retention phase when they were really in the selection phase during this case. They faced the challenge of growing an online following, and thanks to their brand, they were large enough to grow through the variation stage and were fighting to get past the selection phase for an online news source. Key term 5. And the last portion of analysis for this case was Globe and Mail using a generalist and specialist strategy to compete in the environment. I would say specialist based off of the fact that they had not branched out from providing news to public as their primary goal. They could have tried other ventures to bring in profit, but they had kept straight on the path of publishing agency. All in all, the principles behind population ecology can explain what happens to this company. So thus far, the theory is off to a great start. Second, I chose IBM to study because they had some struggles in their environment. Thus, I thought they would make for further evidence of the population ecology model's legitimacy. The particular case study that I'm looking at with IBM is their transition to microcomputers from mainframe assembly and support. As the need for compact household computers increased, IBM started dedicating resources to create microcomputers. At the same time, others in the computer market also identified the same need, and newer, smaller companies started to enter the market. So the race was on, and IBM was moving more like the tortoise than the hare. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for them, but a few reasons made it a challenge. The main reason include that they had to not only reconfigure their assembly lines and warehouses, but also train their employees and still keep their mainframe business going. This lapse in time, while processes changed, gave smaller companies with empty warehouses and blank assembly lines a head start into the market. To analyze what happened, let's go back to population ecology theory and how it plays into this. Remember those key terms. Let's see if they fit. Key term 1. The population for IBM at the time was quite large, with companies like Apple, Commodore, Compaq, and so on. It's estimated that 30+ computer manufacturers existed at the time. Key term 2. IBM's organizational form is massive, but could be described as they hire engineers to create computer software, hardware, and business support services. Key term 3. The niche. When it comes to business niches, IBM was well known for finding them. IBM had entered the market by providing unseen technology to businesses that made them more efficient and assisted them to manage growth. Their business model has been built on innovation and niches. However, the microcomputer in this case proved to be a market they could not move fast enough into. Even though they couldn't capitalize on microcomputers, the theory of population ecology described what happened in their environment to stifle their opportunity. Key term 4, the ecology model. IBM made it through the variation and selection stage, but was unable to make it into the retention phase for this facet of the business. For comparison example, one company that did make it to the retention stage is HP. Luckily, with key term 5, IBM had a kind of generalist strategy that they could so they could fall back into software, mainframe hardware, and support services. For my last bit of supporting evidence of population ecology theory, I had to discuss the automotive industry because few people know how competitive this market originally was and how the big three came about, and how this supports the principles of population ecology. The history of automobiles in the early 1900s shows that over 1,600 companies tried to enter the internal combustion engine environment. This is a huge population by any standard, and only 3 came out successful. That's less than 1%. Since there is not enough time to look at why so many failed in the environment, let's look at why some made it, specifically Ford. The niche that Ford was able to conquer was mass production. The Model T was Ford's first mass-produced automobile and moved the company from the variation phase to the selection phase in the ecology model. With Ford's goal of providing a car to every family, they took a specialist strategy at the market and have been quite successful since. In fact, it's almost seemed that Ford would never have to worry until now, and the rise of Tesla, which is on the next slide. So our group wanted to look at one of the most unpredictable events of the last decade, the rise of Tesla. In a population where all other car companies had entered the retention stage, it seemed unlikely that Tesla would even be a concern to the larger organizations. Could population ecology explain it? Further in the presentation, other members will discuss our thoughts. In conclusion, for part 2 of our presentation, I have a few thoughts. I conclude that the population ecology theory holds true for most organizations except for in communist nations. But to play devil's advocate, I had to ask a few questions that change the rules of an environment in population ecology. Do monopolies have to follow the environment, or does the environment follow them? For example, if I control the oil and I know you need it, do you control me or I control you? Can company loyalty offset the niche market? Do people stick with a company even though the niche market may better suit their needs just because of brand loyalty? Note my Apple picture. And what is the government's influence on this theory? How does the capitalist society align with population ecology versus socialist or communist society? It's all food for thought. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Tesla was incorporated in the state of Delaware on July 1st, 2003, but could not make their dream become a reality without additional funding. Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning could not get the car to market. After already investing $7.5 million, Elon Musk injected another $13 million to get the Roadster to market. In 2008, Elon Musk becomes CEO, and by December of that same year, has invested more than $70 million. With little revenue and bad publicity from the most famous car show Top Gear, more money went into the company through a strategic partnership with Daimler AG, where it acquired a 10% equity share in the company, and a year later Tesla went public. What these first 7 years had proven was that Tesla can adapt. Organizations need to adapt to a changing environment or they will not succeed. Limitations to an organization adapting include corporate culture, investments in equipment, or a successful company too comfortable to change. Tesla replaced the CEO twice, which means it was willing to change the corporate culture to evolve. It had already invested significant money into the company, but knew it needed to invest more to get what they knew was an expensive undertaking to have any chance of moving the world away from fossil fuels. Finally, they had not been successful at turning a profit, yet so they were quickly able to adapt. Thomas Edison wrote a letter to the CEO of GE in 1926 that it takes about 7 years to convert the average man to the acceptance of a solved problem. Tesla and Elon Musk solved getting the car to market, but still had problems to solve. Let's analyze Tesla and how the 5 key terms in population ecology apply. First, let's look at population. The car market is a crowded market, focused on retention, but Tesla chose to adapt. due to the growing environmental concerns with the issues fossil fuels pose to the environment. How does a company use the perspectives of Reverend Thomas Malthus' idea of increasing populations and a limited supply of resources, or Adam Smith's force of supply and demand in the force of nations, and apply it to today's technological and socially responsible society? How does a company take Darwin's struggle for existence and adapt and innovate to today's global world? Tesla used electric cars to adapt and applied Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovation to make it work. Elon Musk understood that there was a method to how new technology and innovation move through populations, and that adaptation requires a diffusion of innovation. He began with focusing on the population of innovators. Innovators are willing to take risks, have the highest social status, have the highest liquidity, are highly social, and have access to other innovators. This initial market focus could afford the cost of the expensive battery technology required to run an electric car. Next, Tesla's organizational form. The company was founded by a group of engineers, and the goal was to transition the world from fossil fuels to sustainable energy. The company's battery and electric powertrain technology, in addition to its culture of innovation, are their core competencies. Tesla also understands that to be successful in its goal, it was about more than producing an electric car with battery technology that can drive longer distances. Tesla understands that it must create an infrastructure to move through the diffusion of innovation to the next stage. What is the niche? Although Tesla struggled with sales at the start, Elon Musk created a niche with understanding that an expensive battery leads to an expensive car. That niche would need to be in the expensive luxury vehicle and high-tech market, and its target population need to be willing to take risks, have high liquidity, and were highly social. The Tesla Model S would need to start out as a status symbol for the wealthy. When organizations find a niche, they satisfy a specific demand in the environment in which they can operate, resulting in survival. Tesla found a niche. However, the company must now get past innovators and move toward the ultimate goal to transition the world to sustainable energy. This can only be completed when the electric car and Tesla become institutionalized in the environment. Tesla must create scale, and to do this, they must create an infrastructure to accommodate the electric car by providing enough power stations that the electric car can be used by early adopters and the early majority, the next two groups in the diffusion of innovation model. The other hurdle is the ability to provide enough lithium batteries and justify whether or not electric vehicles can save on carbon emissions. To produce anything requires embodied energy, energy required to produce and deliver, which comes from hydrocarbon fuels. At this time, the Tesla Model S requires 2,240 kilograms of steel, plastics, metal, and rubber. This equates to driving a conventional vehicle 60,000 kilometers, or 3 to 4 years of fossil fuel burning. All of this is spent prior to purchase. Will the EV slow carbon emissions, and by how much? Tesla's next change would come from moving beyond that first niche market, lowering the cost of the electric car, increasing battery range, and resolving the inevitable battery shortage issues and ecological change that would come with the lithium battery market. They do this by building a network of car superchargers. They are covering the cost of the power at those stations that help entice the early adopters to the market. Finally, Tesla deploys a specialist strategy in response to population ecology. They exploited the external pressures by innovating and finding a niche. The product they sell, electric cars, uses their core competencies on battery and powertrain technology as the building block of their cars.
Part 3.
So what are some criticisms of population ecology? Well, one, the theory itself has been researched by various theorists at, in certain situations, vastly different times as seen in the evolution of the theory at the beginning of this presentation. This created ambiguity and lack of clearly defined definitions. Because of this, it has developed challenges and inconsistencies of the result of interpretations of the theory. Population ecology uses its own technical vocabulary, niche, inertia, etc., mathematical models, rate of change, and sometimes assumptions, and because of this, the concept of this theory can be interpreted differently among people. Although this is a valid criticism, I don't see this as a unique criticism, as it would seem like a challenge for many complex theories out there would face. Kind of the same concept as the previous challenge, item 2 focuses on the population that is being analyzed and the analysis and method being applied. Not all organizations are the same. They are made up differently, whether it's the people of the organization, the leadership style, the industry in which the organization falls in, the size of the organization, etc. It's ensuring that these populations are all classified the same in the same way throughout all the different analysis being conducted. In addition, researchers and theorists tend to look and explain the theory or the results at a high level rather than at a detailed level. The biggest point made across many authors was that there isn't enough variation of organizations used in this theory, mainly that small organizations are generally used because they are generally the victims of changing environments. The main takeaways from the first 2 points is that there isn't a consensus on definitions of the main variables that are used in the application. In addition, results of application will be different depending on the population and environment analyzed. And although the concept or theory may still be valid, the results of different researches lack comparability and therefore challenge the meaningfulness of the results when not used as a standalone basis. 3. Organizations often change on their own without influence from the environment. Instead of responding to the outside environment, adaptations come from within. Through management tactics, financial resources, or training implementation, these companies thrive despite what is occurring outside. Some criticism is made of the lack of study of the internal business structure. However, population ecology is defined as population-based and not individual. Future research could include the effects of management on financial success on predicting survivability. 4. The theory depends heavily on the population density, how many organizations exist, rate of new entrants, rate of exits, etc. Of course, we expect this number to constantly change. However, density dependence limitations inhibit growth due to its population size, not because the organizations lack a change. For instance, organizations will be competing for the same resources available in the given environment, and they may simply not be enough to accommodate everyone. The larger the population, the less resources available for each one. The theory hangs its hat on this concept as it is a direct contributor to who will survive the competition for the environmental supply and demand. The takeaways from the last 2 points is that the theory disregards the ability for internal change of the population. It assumes the population growth and decline is affected directly by external factors, and the environment will decide which populations will continue to grow, plateau, or decline. In short, demand of the population trumps all. Let's look at the concept of fitness, or lack thereof. The environment determines who is fit to survive. The statement lacks meaning, causal pattern, and inconsistent research to make this a valid standalone statement. We've heard the saying, change is the only constant, and in a population ecology theory it suggests that organizations do not change. However, the environment in which the organization operates in will eventually change. The result will eventually cause the organization to become extinct. This happens because the organization's operations and business practices no longer fit the supply and demand of the environment in which it operates in, and new organizations will have eventually taken its market share. In other cases, organizations will evolve, meaning it will either merge with another or change its strategy. This will repeat itself, and those that were once new or newly evolved organizations will then be replaced by newer ones who enter the market to satisfy the new demands. This is a newer concept to battle the population ecology theory and increase the chances of survival by positioning themselves to thrive on a finite, crowded, resource-constrained, climate-destabilized planet. The strategy for creating sustainable business is that it will overcome internal and external pressures that affect the growth or decline of an organization's ultimate success and existence through the years, and that it can retain or grow its market share and not be replaced by new organizations entering the market. This new strategy disrupts this theory and basically puts a stop to the population ecology theory pattern previously explained. We saw this demonstrated by Tesla, where Elon Musk's strategy was to develop a sustainable strategy for its business to survive population ecology. So what are some examples of these motives? For ecological motives, you have conserving energy and resources and limiting the dependence and impact of environmental supply and demand. Economic motives, examples, generating more revenue and reducing costs to improve financial health of an organization and providing it with the financial ability to overcome external changes. Legal and regulatory, new or existing regulatory requirements which dictate additional time and effort required from organizations on certain aspects of operating the business. Compliance with this external force can have a major impact on the organization's operations. Let's look at population ecology versus adaptation theory. Adaptation theory revolves around the idea that organizations watch the outside environment for change, alter their organizational strategies and structures to respond to that change, and then implement the changes, all to enhance performance for survival. In addition, Darwin's theory of self-organization furthers the idea that an organization organizes, survives, evolves, innovates, and develops on its own independent from external forces. Population ecology argues that the outside environment will dictate survival of the company, regardless of the efforts to change. Tesla is a prime example to use here. Earlier, we stated that one of the criticisms from this theory receives is the lack of attention the theory gives to internal adaptations. Previously, we identified Tesla's adaptation strategy, evolve and innovate. It allowed Tesla to adapt to sustain external forces. However, in their case, the rate of their adaptation evolution exceeded the rate of change of the environment. Tesla is a good example of the melding of these two theories. Not only did the environment influence change in strategy, but management also adapted, innovated, and outperformed the required demand of the environment, making it highly favorable for survival in such a market. Research suggests that changes implemented by managers in response to the environment can impact a company's performance and survival negatively. Sometimes employees who are used to the way things are can unintentionally sabotage change and its effects. Management can sometimes be overconfident about implementing change. It worked well before, so it will work again. This ends up in bad decision making and failure either to make the correct changes or to implement them well. Due to structural inertia, adaptation into a new environment often fails. Structural inertia is one of the cornerstones of population ecology theory. Organizations tend to maintain the status quo. Many factors, both internal and external, contribute to this. Financial resources tied up in factories, people resources, policies and procedures, even legal or regulatory requirements can inhibit change. Larger corporations have an even harder time overcoming this inertia factor. An example of this that many of us can relate to is IBM, the computer giant, who was unable to change fast enough to compete with Microsoft. Then Microsoft took over as a software giant and had trouble keeping up with smaller companies like Google and Apple. Small and medium-sized firms don't face the same level of inertia as they are able to implement change more rapidly. For those smaller institutions, the obstacle seems to be resources. They may be able to institute necessary adaptations, but don't have the resources required to accomplish this. Two sides of the coin. Companies that don't adapt quickly enough can become obsolete, but companies in the adaptation phase also face risks associated with change. The greatest risk of obsolescence is during the period of time when new technologies are being introduced. If firms can withstand this change, then the risk of death decreases as knowledge and experience with the new technology increases. One implication of the population ecology theory is that those corporations with a strong technology strategy have a better chance of survival outside environmental factors. This strategy should include what technologies to develop and whether they want to be a leader in those technological areas. When the development of the strategy becomes a focus for the company, meaning it is developed early and updated often, they will have a better chance of weathering the storm. All companies change. I think the question is, are the changes being made because of the outside environment, or are the internal changes affecting the outside environment? It seems to be that it is a little of both. A new technology developed by a company can influence consumers in such a way that the external environment changes. Either way, either what they are purchasing or how they are purchasing it undergoes a transformation. The view of which theory is the winner is dependent on whether you are the company who changed the environment or the company who is responding to the change. Which theory wins in your mind? If population ecology suggests that the environment selects who survives and who doesn't, and the adaptation theory suggests that we adapt to survive, then what came first? For example, the environment is influenced by its external factors, people, organizations, etc. And the people and organizations are influenced by the demand of the environment. It basically creates a circle of life. With this thought, whichever factor has a higher rate of change will prevail as an influencing force of natural selection. In this case, population ecology would suggest that the environment changes quicker than the population. Hence, those organizations with favorable traits will survive while others won't. In the adaptation theory, it suggests that the population adapts quicker than a change in the environment or other external forces. Population ecology can be a useful theory both for emerging companies and longtime competitors. Those companies that have been around the block must be vigilant about staying abreast of new consumer interests. Complacency and sticking to "that's the way we've always done it" will lead to decreased market share and the possibility of collapse as new products enter the marketplace. Smaller new companies will have an uphill battle to make their business work. Statistics say that 80% of new small businesses fail within the first 18 months. Population ecology can work in their favor if they have a niche product or a new development that catches the public's eye. These new businesses must also have a good plan, enough capital, and a stroke of good luck. This theory makes sense in some instances. However, all of the theories presented in this chapter have useful and relevant application. Collaboration with suppliers is important to ensure your products can be made. This can include some of the resource dependence relationships such as supply sourcing. Depending on the type of business, product delivery and sales can also require some collaboration. Institutionalism can help standardize best practice, increase competition among rivals. We cannot forget the human factor. Without good people practices and strong leadership, all the theories in the world will not guarantee a successful business. One real-life example, Barnes & Noble, has had difficulty competing with the increase in online sales from Amazon along with other competitors. They were not quick enough to change their focus from a storefront to an online presence, and it has cost them. What could they have done better? I feel that they could have taken a closer look at their online competition and taken them seriously, possibly revamped or added some services to direct sell to the customers without them visiting the store. Unfortunately, they started behind with the development of the Nook and more of an online presence and have never caught up. Their revenues have fallen every year from 2012 at $5.39 billion to $4.16 billion in 2016. Is it too late? Will they survive? Only time will tell. Our focus company for this project, Tesla, falls on the other end of the spectrum, a small startup that has had relative success competing with the big guys. From 18% market share in 2012 to 32% in 2012, it is steadily growing in electric vehicle sales. They have, in a relatively short period of time, changed their offerings from sport car to luxury sedan. Smart business sense mixed with a big outlay of initial cash has made for a successful foray into this niche market. Tesla has recently expanded into the energy storage business and merged with a company that makes solar products. Is this too much, too fast, or can Tesla overcome the dangerous period of time when adding new technologies can lead to the demise of a company?
Part 4.
To summarize our presentation, population ecology was born from Thomas Malthus, Adam Smith, and Charles Darwin, who recognized the importance of the struggle for existence as well as supply and demand. Population ecology is a different way to look at how organizations interact based on population and geography. Populations in a given area compete for the same resources, supply and demand, as well as the struggle for existence creates a cyclical pattern for the rise and fall of populations. Successful populations find their niche and are able to stay away from external environment factors. This is what Tesla was able to do and why they were successful. There have been many criticisms of this theory throughout the years, such as the lack of clarity or the demand, of the environment trumps all other factors, internal and external. But what has been the real game changer against population ecology is the organizational sustainability movement. Also, the adaptation theory is an interesting counter theory to pair with population ecology. With all of this said, we conclude that population ecology is useful, but not always successful, and most beneficial when used in conjunction with other theories. As we conclude our presentation, we want to leave you with some ideas that you can apply to your daily life as a manager. 1. Be willing to adapt your organization to changes from the external environment. Don't be afraid to change with the times. 2. If you are starting a new business, find a niche that has a strong need for your product or service. With this, take a look at the competition in your area. Maybe even look into other areas if there already is a business serving your population. 3. Be prepared for a competitive struggle for resources. Even if there is no competition when you enter the market, there will be at some point. Expect that and be ready to adapt as needed. It is a tough world out there, and understanding concepts like population ecology will help you navigate it. And again, thank you for listening to our presentation. We hope you found it informative. There will be a link for a quiz outside of this presentation. We're looking forward to hearing your feedback. Thank you.